In this video, we're going to explore some of the advanced envelope modulations that are possible in Native Instruments Kontakt 5. And I'm going to start from a simple waveform and kind of build up a patch from nothing. And the great thing about this, again, is that the modulation really defines the sound. And any sound used as a source would really be fine. So I'm starting with this buzzer waveform, and I'm just going to drag it to an empty rack in Kontakt. And this is immediately going to map the sound across the keyboard so I can play it across the keyboard. Let's click on the wrench and edit the device itself. And I'm just going to play this. The only problem I'm having is that it's stopping the sound right away, and I would like it to loop the sound. Also, the source mode isn't quite correct for what I'm trying to do. The source mode here is set to DFD, which stands for direct from disk, which is perfect for large sampled instruments, like a big piano sound that could be multiple gigabytes in itself. And direct from disk would actually store all that sample sound and data on the hard drive, and then as you hit a key, it would stream it from the hard drive in real time. In fact, it loads just the first little bit of each waveform into RAM, and then plays that immediately when you hit the key, and then moves over to streaming from the hard drive after that. That's good for big sample libraries, but since I'm just looping one individual waveform, it's going to be better if I move that entire sample into RAM, and I can do that by switching to the sampler mode. That gives us a couple other options, like modulating start point in the with Kontakt, which can be nice in this context. It also is just going to be more responsive as I work with the more complex wave editing features. Right away, I'm going to choose H high quality interpolation up to perfect, which will reduce some aliasing noise as I play up and high on the keyboard. And again, we can play the sound across the keyboard. But it does stop. I'd like to have a looping waveform. To be able to edit the waveform itself, I'm going to open up the mapping editor, and I'll see that the file is mapped across the keyboard, and that C3 is the root note. And what you do is you set the root note to the note of the original audio file that you recorded. And I know this waveform is playing a C3, so I set my root note to C3. And what's going to happen is if I play C3 on the keyboard, that sound file will play back as it originally was recorded. If I play below C3 on the keyboard, it's going to play back slower. And if I play above C3 on the keyboard, it'll play back faster, changing the pitch. Now, I would like to make this waveform a loop, so I'll open up the wave editor and scroll down a bit, and we see the audio file that this is. I can turn on sample loop 1, and now as I hit a key, it's going to loop repeatedly. And because the audio file is properly cropped, I can now have a nice looping waveform that I could even play polyphonically if I wanted to. I can close these sections up, but we'll return to them a bit later. Now right away, again, we have this modulation already configured for us, the tracking of keyboard, and also at the very bottom of the rack, we have the volume modulation, and I'm going to reduce the release kind of all the way down. So now I can start and stop the sound right when I need to. Perfect. Now the next thing I'd like for this sound is to have kind of a rhythmic pulse or nice rhythm that's synchronized to the global tempo. And the one that's going to be really good for this, for creating nice pulsing rhythms, will be a step sequencer. So I'm going to go to my volume here, and I'm going to add a modulator by right-clicking, go down to Others, and I have this option for 32-step step sequencer. And this will allow me to create a really interesting rhythmic pulse. And I'll enable that. Right away, we see that added the modulation lane. The source is step modulator, destination is volume. We have a positive modulation and of 100%, and it's positive because the invert key is off. I'll click this button here to scroll down and highlight the modulator. I'm also going to hide the portion of the interface that I'm not really using at the moment. Now I want this to have an interesting rhythm, so I'm going to start by turning all these down. So this is a step sequencer, and each one of these steps will control the volume of my sound. Right now, we have a 1 Hertz rate. I'm going to click on Hertz, and I'm going to choose 30-second notes. So now each one of these can be a 30-second note, but right now we have a multiplier, so each step is actually 17 30-second notes, which isn't what I want at the moment. So I'm going to change my frequency so that each step is 1 30-second note. Now I can draw in an interesting rhythm. What if I do this? I'm kind of being a little random here and seeing how it'll turn out. I'm going to play. Let's hear it with the groove. By adjusting the rhythms here, we can get nice variations of different rhythmic pulses. Now, once you find a rhythm you like, you can actually save it as a preset so you can use it in other patches. I think it's important as an electronic musician to start really thinking of creating sounds in a modular way. Once you find a good rhythm, save it as a preset so you can open up in different patches. You can go to preset and save preset to save your preset. Now, I've done that earlier and created a preset that I really like, and I'll go for this one. And now let's hear this. So I like that rhythm. I might want to use it for this patch. So I have an interesting rhythm now created with this step sequencer, and now I'd like to create some interesting pitch motion. And instead of using a step sequencer for that, though it would be kind of interesting if you use a step sequencer, I'm going to use a synced envelope. They have a really nice envelope here in Kontakt. So I'll go back to the top of the rack, and I want to create pitch variations. So I'll go to my tuning parameter, right-click, choose envelopes, and I'm going to try to use the flexible envelope. Now, this is a looping envelope that can be synced to your global tempo, so you can create really interesting loopable rhythms of pitch variations, which is kind of neat. And I'll click on flexible envelope. Immediately, like before, we get a new modulation lane. Source is envelope flexible, destination is pitch, and we have an amount, which I'm going to bring all the way up to a full octave or 12 semitones, and I'll leave it in a positive direction. I can click on this button, jump down to the modulator, and I see my pitch modulator right here. I'm going to try to play this sound now. So we had that nice pitch modulation at the beginning. That's kind of nice, right? Now, I might want to make this synchronize exactly to a measure and, work out so I can create really interesting rhythmic pitch variations. To do that, the first thing I'll do is hit tempo sync. So now we see 30-second note divisions in the background of this envelope. Now we notice this area right here, this kind of H that you're looking at, this is the looping portion of the envelope. And I'm going to try to set that first right to the beginning. So it's right at the beginning of the envelope, and this one I'm going to move till it's exactly one measure. Now, as I'm moving this, I'm looking at absolute time. I want this to be one measure and this to be at the very beginning, or at 0. All right? And then delta time will be the distance from one breakpoint to a previous breakpoint. Now, in previous envelopes we looked at, we had a set number of stages of the envelope, maybe attack, decay, sustain, and release. Now, a flexible envelope has an arbitrary number. You can choose as many stages as you like. To create a new stage or a new breakpoint, you're going to right-click, and that will create a new breakpoint for you. I'm going to take this last point and bring it all the way up. I'm going to bring this one down, and look what just happened. I had a breakpoint, and I'm moving it, and it's causing the end of my loop to shift, which really isn't what I want right now, because I want that loop always to be exactly one measure. So I'm going to set this back to one measure perfectly. We look at absolute time. We see 1, 1, which stands for one measure. And then I'll switch from mode, from slide to fixed. And now I can adjust breakpoints inside the loop and not change my loop length, which is really what I want here. Let me try this as a possible envelope. Let's try it. Not really that bad, right, with my groove? Here we go. So that might be kind of interesting. Now you see I have these big pitch modulations. Now honestly, I'd like this to go over a wider range. So I'm going to go back up to the modulation destination. I'll click on this button to do that. Unfortunately, I'm already at the maximum modulation amount, which is 12 semitones. But the beauty of Kontakt is you can have as many modulators and destinations as you want. So a way to get a wider range is actually just to use the same exact modulator controlling pitch twice. Let's see how we would do that. I can right-click on tuning, and I can go down to existing. This is showing me all the modulators that are already configured in this instrument. And we see envelope to pitch is already there. By choosing that, I now have a second modulation lane, and I can turn that all the way up. And these two modulation amounts will be added together. So now I'll have a 2-octave modulation range. Let's hear it. Which might be kind of interesting. Now, just like the step modulator, we can choose different presets for the modulation shape. And I'll click on this button to jump back down to my modulation source. I could save this as my own preset by using Save Preset, or I can go to one of the ones that I previously made, like this one. Let's hear this. Kind of cool. Now the great thing about this is both these modulators will restart as I play. So I can go. Right? So as you start playing around, playing different notes and starting at different points of the measure, you can get really interesting rhythmic and pitch variations. You could even go so far as to change the loop length of both of these so they never really line up perfectly. Now, like we had with Massive, it really is the modulation that defines the sound. And now that I have this modulation configured, I can go in and change the source sound to get a huge variety of possible variations on this. And this is when we're going to go back to the wave editor. So right now we've been using this simple just waveform, but I could change the sample out to different waveforms to get different sounds. Now we'll show the mapping editor. We'll need to use both of these for this instance. And I have an option in the mapping editor to swap out this sound. If I right click here on this zone, I have an option for exchange sample. So I can find another sample on my hard drive and swap it out for this one, changing the sound drastically. And so go to your sample libraries, any samples you have. I'm going to grab some things that are vocal. I like vocal sounds for this. They sound really interesting with the pitch modulation, almost takes on like a record scratching sort of sound. So I'll grab some kind of vocal sound. And the truth is, everything works for that. And I'm going to try something that I never really had before. Let's try laughs and see how that works. Now, one of the keys with this is to choose a file in a folder that has lots of sounds. You'll find lots of sample libraries are like this, where they have lots of different sounds in it. That works best for this, and I'll show you why soon. So I'll choose a sound right here, this laugh sound. And that's what it looks like in the wave editor. Let's hear it. So that's pretty cool. And now I can actually change my loop position. And I can change the loop length. So you can get a really interesting variations on sounds, and any sound will work with this. Now the beauty of choosing exchange sample and using a folder that has lots of sounds is now in the waveform editor here, I can start just going through all the different audio files in that single folder and trying out different sounds. Different wavelengths, loop lengths I mean. With the beat. And you can change your start point as well. I like that. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting I find about this and exploring this idea is that if I use a longer loop length that has a sound that has a variety of different sounds, now I have these 3 different loop lengths interacting, and it really can be surprising what you get. I have the loop length of my volume variations, the step modulator. I have the loop length of my pitch variations, which again we can adjust manually. And I also have the loop length of the sound. So you can get a huge variety of different sounds, play up and down the keyboard, swap out the samples. This kind of thing, just like the riser sound in Massive, is a template that you can use to create a huge variety of really interesting and fun sounds. This is a sound design, is a beautiful experiment in sound design. I really hope you take this idea and explore it further and just have fun with it. Create some great sounds, and don't forget to save your patches so you have stuff you can use in other projects.